The system requires increasing levels of debt in order to produce this Potemkin economic environment. And really the reason why they have debt is because the parasites that live at the top live off of the interest of the debt. They produce nothing, but yet they get to reap the interest rates. That's what happens. That's what's called fractional reserve lending.
With global stock markets gaining 17 trillion in value throughout 2019 alone, global stock markets have been on a torrid run through the last year. And with the disruption in supply chains across the planet beginning now, there's never been a better time in history to invest in the stock market. Trade Genius issuing sell signals, buy signals, shorting signals. And over the last 30 days, Trade Genius has netted its traders 91% of their money from stock and crypto trades. And with the unknown if companies can indeed continue their supply chain allocations, binary options come in play. And if you've never traded before and want to take advantage of these types of profits every day in the market, I urge you to sign up for one of many of Trade Genius online educational courses. Learn to trade stocks, cryptocurrency, binary options. Right now through the month of February, you can save over 40% off bundled specials. Use the promo code Valentine's. TradeGeniusAcademy.com and discover the lucrative world of trading with personal coaching from Bob Kudla and Philip Cleaver. Because our world's entering uncharted territory, and Trade Genius can see over the horizon. TradeGeniusAcademy.com. The link's in the description box below. Good afternoon, everyone. Today with me, Bob Kudla, TradeLikeAGenius.com. And with all the changes in money, literally, apparently going through, and today China verifying that they are going to burn all cash in the country, they call it cash quarantine, where they're going to move over to a cashless system. And anything that has not been printed, or it's going to be a new mint mark on top of the bills to show that they are indeed disease-free, all prior currency to that needs to be destroyed. So I think we're going to see huge movements in terms of currency around the world when this is happening. And then we look at all the ships backed up everywhere from Singapore. If you take a look at some of the feeds on the economic side in Singapore, I mean, you got a telephoto lens looking out at 1,000 boats sitting off there, anchored out because force majeure, China's claiming. There's just so much unknown at this time. Factory closures until May 1st in China. They may even render longer than that. So the world we used to know is definitely going to be changing. And what a perfect time to talk about trading and cryptocurrency, possibly how you think the markets might move. And just, we're in a time that nothing like this has ever been seen before. So you can look at it two ways. Fear, which I don't buy into, or the greatest opportunity that's still coming at us left, right, and center. So I wanted to talk to Bob today and run us through a couple possible scenarios and see where it leads us. Plus, I really wanted to talk about the run-up in crypto and how these markets are moving, and also the possibilities with these signals trading platforms that they've also put together for you to make it a bit easier. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. And one thing you noticed during the news feeds too, you remember about a month and a half, maybe even a month ago, there was so many 50 choices of stories that were out there about corruption and, protests and whatever. That's all been washed away for a certain purpose on a certain narrative now. So it's all funneled right into this virus thing. And it's real interesting how China wants to go cashless at this moment. And they're also trying to apply the blockchain, create their own state-sponsored cryptocurrency, which they've been working on for quite a few years now. So I'm wondering if this is the time it's going to be unveiled. So as we look at this unknown landscape in front of us, great opportunities. And Bob, thanks for coming with me today, because I have a few questions that I know our listeners are going to want to listen to. And I think you and I bouncing ideas is going to be a wonderful session of possibilities and, how we see our own different worlds meshing in the middle, the grand solar minimum crop losses, and you on the economic trading end. And here we go. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, I think, first of all, let's just talk cryptos. I think they're front running some of this stuff. India tried to pull this off too. I'll get to that in a second. So we're at the end state of the, what I would call economic freedom for the world. Either it's going to go totally like China, or it's just going to blow up, and we're going to be able to go into some brave new world. So I'll start talking India, and then I'll talk China. India's in big trouble. Okay, it has been in big trouble. They don't have the ability to generate a positive trade environment, and they have to import energy, and they have to import food. And so their government was trying to smash out the black market by eliminating big bills, and then also trying to confiscate and tax gold. And so that could be, because India's a big gold, that gold is the wealth of the poor. They keep that in jewelry and so on and so forth. But these governments know that if there's any alternative to their fiat regimes, then people can sidestep the government's efforts. And then you take this to China, they're either extremely overreacting to this disease, or there's a bioweapon out there that nobody knows about, and they're lying about the number of infected and number dead based on quarantining now 60-70% of their population and shutting down the factories. And so there's all kinds of theories out there. So one of them is that they want to scare the people so that the Communist Party doesn't get blamed for the economic collapse that's going to come, number one, because China right now is the most indebted country in the world. And they have strict capital controls, but money's still leaking out. And so this might be their move then to do it, as you suggested, is get rid of the cash, basically make cash illegal, put everybody on the digital machine here. They'll be able to uncover basically the shadow environment that was out there, and then turn around and just keep those people in a pressure cooker. And then that is going to come to everywhere in the world. And so you have Europe, which is extremely dependent on China. So, everybody talks about America and China. Well, America only has 14% of their GDPs in trade anyway, and half of that's with China. So we're 7%. Okay, if China disappeared tomorrow, that's 7% of our GDP, right? So probably within a year to 18 months, we could totally replace China without blinking. Europe, on the other hand, is totally dependent on China. They provided China with basically all the technology that China is now using to basically try to overthrow the world in manufacturing. And Germany in particular is machine tools and automobiles. And a couple things happening to Germany in that regard. Automobiles are eventually going to go all electric. So you don't need that extreme engineering that you do with an internal combustion engine, number one. And number two is that they export a lot to China. Well, if China's factories are down, they don't need Germany's high tech, robotics or equipment or machine tools or any of that stuff. And so Europe is probably going to unravel on us. And I don't know really how that's going to all play out. Probably will break into a number of different currencies. And then that leaves the US. And everybody's sitting there saying, WTF, Japan just printed negative GDP, I think. China's definitely going to print negative GDP, whether they claim that or not. There's no way China can't go negative. You can't not have a negative GDP when you shut down most of your factories. And then our stock market is sitting at ready to break over 3,400 on the S&P index, because our central banks have made a decision to never let the stock market crash again, to protect all the pensions out there, basically to keep a rolling destruction like we had in 2008. So now we're at a point now where all the fiats are printing. So the cryptos started to make a move, and then you have Bitcoin going into its halving this summer, which is people probably trying to front run that a little bit. And but crypto, if you look at it, cryptocurrencies, you can sidestep the banking system, you can sidestep capital controls, and then gold is just a monetary asset that has no liability whatsoever. When I say gold, I'm talking gold, silver, platinum, palladium, and even rhodium. Okay, I'll show you a chart here of a stock that's incredible, and it's a gold slash rhodium company. That's where the money's going to be, unless we go totally, the world goes totally China, which I don't think that's going to happen. I think China is actually going to implode. And so, and we've been talking for years. I mean, when did we start talking, Dave? 2016, 2015?
Yeah, 15, I think it was. Yeah, it's been about 5 years so far.
Yeah,
And,
we said
since
China's
I was
not
living over that way for a while, we'd always compared information about, how they might be moving, especially with AC chain and the beginning of their own independent network of satellites to broadcast transmissions on the blockchain. And, the whole bunch of NEO and, a quantum and all these other different specific homemade, if you will, Chinese operating and also satellite networks and everything in between. They've done it themselves. And then, the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, come out last year, said they're going to issue their own digital currency that's going to replace the yuan. Magically, where are we? Got to destroy all the cash. Imagine that. They want them to go cardless, and they probably, the PBOC will say, look how good we are. We're going to race through and we're going to push this in because we love the people so much. We want to make sure they have currency to buy, sell, trade, but it's all going to be crypto based. Oh, I bet. Look for it already, the way they're going to run with the narrative to usher in this whole digital landscape that shall be tracked, and you shall not buy or sell without this mark.
Yeah, that's amazing. But China's not going to survive this, Dave, because they're not going to be able to feed their people. So, you don't want to talk about the four horsemen, right? So, food's coming, and when people don't get enough to eat, the big refrain that I hear out of China, from people that I can get information from, is that they're less worried about the disease and they're more worried about starving to death.
Right.
They're unable to get to places. And look at Hong Kong. The most valuable commodity in Hong Kong is toilet paper.
I know. Did you see the armed robbery? The armed robbery for toilet paper in Hong Kong. And that's the most, like, even if you would have said that a year ago to me, I would have laughed you off the face of the planet. Like, that place could never go down to the point where they're going to be robbing toilet paper off trucks.
Yeah, it's really bad. And Singapore is going to have the same issue. These nation states that really are really these high-tech bubbles. I consider Hong Kong kind of like a highly educated, high tech, even though they do a lot of lowbrow stuff. But Singapore is the same way. They got to import everything. And so, Hong Kong's in big trouble. Singapore's in big trouble. China Inc. is in big trouble. Japan Inc. less so, but they're basically, you saw what happened. They've been printing currency now for the last 25 years, Dave. They can't create inflation. They cannot. And the demographics are working against them. As people age, they buy less stuff. They're in less debt. And what people don't realize about our economic system is the system requires increasing levels of debt in order to produce this Potemkin economic environment. And really, the reason why they have debt is because the parasites that live at the top live off of the interest of the debt. They produce nothing, but yet they get to reap the interest rates. That's what happens. That's what's called fractional reserve lending. That's what that's all about. And so you have to get out of the banking system, right? And there's only three ways to do it, right? Crypto, precious metals, and barter. And so, and I think we're going to come to that area, and I think there's going to be some really weird dislocations happening. The world better pray that food prices don't go up dramatically like they did in 2011, because if the American federal government or the Federal Reserve have to raise interest rates for whatever reason, it'll sink the world.
Yeah, let me throw in a caveat here to the agricultural end of it. China's coming into the planting season right now, and everybody's locked in. So I just don't know how they're going to bring up their agricultural infrastructure to plant millions and millions and millions of acres when their supply chains are down, where they can't get the seeds. They won't have the fuels for the farm equipment to get in there. Plus, you're not allowed to be out of your house. I saw some startling, countryside images where they'd boarded people in. It's just like they die or they live through it, and that's it. There's only A or B choice. You starve, you live through the virus, and then maybe you come out of there, maybe. But you've seen how many ducks and fish and chickens and everything have died because they haven't been giving them the animal feed or the fish feed. I mean, it's a total wipeout of almost every agricultural living thing has died because of lack of food. And then when the farmers actually have produce to take into the cities, they get stuck at those roadblocks and the police hassle them, and they ended up dumping out all their fruit all over the road and running over it so nobody can get it. So it's just becoming bad to worse. And then my whole thing is, how are they going to plant this year? That is such the wild card. How are they going to plant? They're not. This is another collapse of China based on this grand solar minimum 400-year cycle. And I could see why the mandate from heaven has been removed from the emperor once again. It makes sense. Like, you can't plant. It's just a conundrum that they're never going to get out of unless, you went back to that first thought of, other ulterior ideas. What if they knew this year they wouldn't have enough food? So they were, trying to kill 4 or 5 birds with one stone. And there wouldn't be enough food and the food prices would be exponential, and that would cause a rift in society they couldn't control. But then they can usher in the cashless society, and then they can control the food supply. And there's a whole other gamut of things that, bring more control for the CCP, weed out all the political enemies, anybody who's ever spoken out against the CCP itself. They can just purge everybody all under the name of the quarantine. So you get all these things happening at the same time simultaneously. So once they do reset, it'll be 100% loyalty under a new currency and a far reduced population. And it's a way for them to reset and start over again, basically.
And look, they're trying to export this whole model. But yeah, I mean, that was the first thought that came to my head was, the biggest budget item on most of these countries is social programs for people over 65, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, they spent the last 20 years inculcating every child in this country of the virtues of socialism. And then they wipe out all the expense that's associated with caring for your elderly. The Chinese couldn't do that because, the elders are so revered. But if you put a disease out there, right, and that wipes them out, then, how can they be blamed, right? And then, blame it on a natural phenomenon like a bat. But what's interesting to me is that people are not dying outside of China at the same level they're dying inside of China. And so, I don't put anything past anybody anymore. I used to think people are loony that thought of this stuff. And now I'm sitting there going, say, maybe I'm not loony enough. I mean, when you totally believe that you are basically God on earth, you could justify any kind of behavior whatsoever. And I think we're seeing that. The Chinese obviously feel that way. Xi feels that he's unassailable. And the thing is, they're walking a fine line. The economy could collapse. Nothing worse than starving people, right? I have this.
They're uncontrollable. You don't know what their actions are going to be, but for a quarantine, you know exactly what the steps are going to be. You got a 1,000-page manual, step by step, right?
Yeah, if you're going to die anyway, what do you care, right? You're going to take them all with you. And people don't realize, look, it's only 3% of the population controlling the 97%. So once people realize that they truly are in charge, versus, once the fear of something else exceeds the fear of the regime will collapse. And so this is what's really interesting to me. And the U.S. has taken advantage of this. We're taking advantage of this time period to try to rip out the supply chains to China. And, we're not even hiding it. We're like, hey, we don't want their semiconductor tech. We don't want their, look, 97% of the antibiotics. I mean, we've exposed a lot of things here I don't think the Chinese were ready for. That's why I'm just wondering if this was truly a mistake. They were not yet in a good enough position. Maybe this thing got out of hand for them, and that's why they're panicking by trying to shut down everything else. But as far as I'm concerned, is I don't worry about that too much. Other than how can I don't want to be callous about it, but how can I profit from this? What's my knowledge? What's my advantage? And we know cryptos are an advantage. And you look at oil here. I mean, oil took a tumble.
Yeah, and you have to look out too. And one thing for me is I've been trying to change or trace back all these supply chains that are coming from China going outbound, because China in turn exports a lot of corn and wheat to other nations, further smaller nations, of course. So you have to look down to see where exports are going to be cut off additionally to other places further down, smaller nations, third tier economies, and then take a look at what they're importing or exporting further on. Because if their food prices double or triple in, say, I don't know, Uganda or something, or Nigeria, then how's that going to affect those exports that are coming out of there? I mean,
Yeah, look, in East Africa is running through locusts, so they may not be. They may not be. Look at Pakistan is
they're getting
having
eaten by locusts as well. Those swarms are all the way over into Pakistan now.
yeah. So there may not be extra food, and if anything thwarts the Russian Ukrainian that grain belt, then it's Katie bar the door, and so it's not yet reflected in the food prices so much. One thing that people, when they always ask me, can I make money trading the markets with food? The problem is that what we have available to us to trade is that these are futures contracts that are represented to us as funds. And the way these contracts roll, they always want to kind of push the price down. So it's hard to make big moves. And look at these moves aren't exactly huge, in terms of time frame. So they're kind of choppy. I always use DBA as kind of a reference, as you can see here. But, you're talking the month of February, we had basically 1.5% impulses. All right. The moves we want to make is, I'll show you here on a monthly here.
Yeah, compare that off to like Bitcoin or something where it's pulling 10% over those same 1.5 moves, something on those ETFs.
Yeah. So here, this is DBA. This is what happens in futures contracts, how they destroy a value in the stock price. So you have to kind of stay away from it. What you need is an event like this.
Yeah, you need another event like those Nebraska floods from last year. And I couldn't believe the price went the opposite of where it was supposed to go. Even it caught farmers were a little bit angry that they'd gone out long on that to try to cover their losses, and they got burned by the USDA.
Yeah. So look, I mean, here was the 2010 to 2012 move. This was the Arab Spring. Okay. So, this was a double, Dave. But after that, the bankers got a hold of it and said, look, we got to wring inflation out of the system. This is why the farmers are suffering. Okay. Has nothing to do with China, had everything to do with the bankers. All right. The bankers are able to control futures prices by selling naked contracts, and then they cover lower. So it's hard to make money in the stock market on these food things unless you just catch a move. Where the opportunities are going to be is actually shorting the restaurants. Okay. When food prices spike, they can't pass it on. So you have to look at what I call secondary opportunities. And with China, it's going to be incredible. Let's see what Yum Brands is doing. I think Yum's going to suffer mightily because they're huge in China.
Yeah, obviously. Now, those of you who don't know Yum, that's
Taco Bell.
Yeah, and KFC and all that rolled into
Pizza
one
Hut.
over there in China.
Yeah, these stocks have been unassailable for years, and now they're starting to get some wiggle here. Okay, and so I'm watching them. Here's Starbucks. Here's Mickey D's. These are the ones that are going to start losing ground, and that's where we have to really start watching for the opportunity. You have Darden restaurants. You watch this one. Here's a head and shoulder pattern forming right here, Dave. Okay, so 124, 120, come back down to right around this area here. These are that's 5-6% moves. Those are nice trading moves. Money's coming out. The enthusiasm index is falling here. You see. And so I'm expecting a lot of these restaurant companies to retrace. People aren't eating out in the U.S. because they can't afford it. People aren't eating out in China because they can't get to the restaurants. And if input costs start to rise, that you can't see those in the stock charts because what people pay from the wholesalers are not reflected in the futures prices. So this is where I'm looking for my opportunity. And then also you look at a company like Kroger, right? This is the big food chain. This one's going to suffer too. So that's where people always ask me, where can I make money if food prices go up? You're going to make money by learning how to short against these restaurants and these grocery stores. And you can do it through put options. And so, we'll be calling out some of these trades and seeing where the opportunities are. But right now, we're still making most of our money trading in the metals and the miners.